The air in the auction barn was thick with the smell of damp earth, anxious livestock, and unwashed bodies. Alara clutched Lily's small, trembling hand, her own palms slick with a fear that tasted like metal. Behind her, secured clumsily in a worn blanket sling across her back, the baby, Clara, whimpered softly. Alara swayed slightly, her knees weak, but straightened her spine, forcing her gaze forward. She would not break. Not here. Not now. Before them stood the auctioneer, his voice a practiced bellow cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. He was gesturing towards them, his words painting a picture of their desperate state. Orphaned, penniless, alone. Livestock for sale. Only they were not cattle or horses. They were children, girls, property. The thought was a cold stone in Alara's gut. She tightened her grip on Lily, whose wide, frightened eyes mirrored the horror Alara felt but dared not show. Lily was 5, small for her age, and she understood enough to know they were on display, judged unwanted. Clara, barely a year old, nestled against Alara's back, blissfully unaware of the abyss they teetered on the edge of. The faces in the crowd blurred into a single, judging mass, rough men, some with wives whose expressions ranged from pity to sharp disapproval. Whispers followed them like flies. Too many mouths. Who'd want 3, especially a baby? Alara felt their eyes dissecting her, measuring her worth, her ability to work, her potential as a burden. She was 12, tall for her age, strong from years of helping Pa before the sickness took them. But 12 was young to carry the weight of 2 other lives. The bidding started low, hesitant. A farmer looking for a field hand, maybe, or a woman wanting a housemaid. But they wanted just 1, not 3. The auctioneer's enthusiasm waned. This wasn't profitable. He started talking about separating them, selling the older girl first, then maybe finding someone for the smaller ones. Alara's breath hitched. Separation. It was the nightmare she'd pushed away since they'd been brought here. She couldn't breathe, her chest tightening as if a rope were being cinched around it. Lily whimpered, pressing closer. Then, a voice. Deep, quiet, cutting through the noise not with volume, but with presence. 3. All heads turned. Alara's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the source. He stood near the back, away from the others. A man in worn, practical clothes, a duster coat the color of dust, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was mostly obscured, but she saw a square jaw, a serious mouth. He wasn't like the others. No loud jokes, no leering eyes. Just still. The auctioneer paused, surprised. Did I hear a bid for the lot? 3 girls. The man nodded curtly. 3. There was a stir in the crowd, murmurs of confusion, disapproval. That Silas always keeps to himself. What would he want with children? Alara didn't know the name, but she felt the weight of the unspoken judgment. The man, Silas, didn't react, simply waited. The bidding picked up slightly, challenged by another, then another, but Silas matched them, his voice steady, unwavering. He wasn't bidding high, not recklessly, but with a quiet determination that signaled he wouldn't be easily dissuaded. The other bidders, sensing this, or perhaps simply losing interest in the strange turn of events, dropped off. The auctioneer looked from Silas to the silent crowd, then back to the platform where Alara stood, gripping Lily, the baby a soft weight on her back. Going once, going twice, the gavel hung in the air. Alara held her breath, watching the man, trying to read something, anything, in his still posture. Who was he? What did he want? Fear warred with a desperate flicker of hope. At least they weren't being separated. Sold! The gavel fell with a sharp, final crack that echoed in the sudden silence. The crowd rustled, shifting, turning away. The transaction was complete. Alara's legs gave way slightly, and she stumbled, catching herself on Lily's small frame. They were his now. Property. But together, the man called Silas began to move towards the platform, emerging from the shadows of the barn, and Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, the unknown stretching before them, vast and terrifying. Silas didn't offer a hand, didn't speak as he approached. He simply stopped a few feet away, his eyes, a pale, unreadable gray beneath the brim of his hat, settling on Alara. Not on the auctioneer, not on the paperwork being rustled, but on her. She felt exposed, scrutinized. Lily hid her face in Alara's skirt. Clara stirred, her tiny hand batting against Alara's shoulder. "Come on," Silas said, his voice low, rumbling like distant thunder. It wasn't unkind, but it wasn't warm either. Just functional. Alara nodded mutely, unable to find her voice. She guided Lily down the steps, careful with the baby on her back. Every instinct screamed caution. This man was a stranger, a man who had bought them like sacks of feed. But he had also kept them together. That simple fact, the one thing she had prayed for with every fiber of her being, was a fragile thread of possibility in the darkness. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the stifling barn. A worn wagon stood hitched to a pair of sturdy, quiet horses. Silas moved with an economical grace, securing a small canvas bag in the wagon bed. He didn't look at them as he worked. Alara hesitated, not knowing where to sit, what to do. "Up," he said, indicating the wagon seat with a slight tilt of his head. Alara helped Lily clamber up first, then, with effort, pulled herself onto the seat, settling Clara more comfortably. Silas didn't help, but he didn't rush them either. He swung up onto the seat beside her, the wagon creaking under his weight. The distance between them felt immense, filled with unspoken questions and anxieties. He clucked to the horses, and they started forward, pulling out of the dusty yard and onto the road leading away from town. Alara didn't look back. There was nothing there for them now but the memory of the cold eyes and the gavel's crack. She focused on the road ahead, on the man beside her. He held the reins loosely, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was a solid presence, quiet and contained. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows that stretched across the flat, desolate landscape. The silence in the wagon was heavy, broken only by the creak of the wheels, the soft snuffles of the horses, and Clara's occasional sigh. Alara stole glances at Silas. His profile was rugged, weathered. There was a scar near his left eye. He didn't seem to notice her watching. After a time, Clara started to fuss, a low, tired wail. Alara shifted, trying to soothe her, murmuring quiet words. Silas turned his head slightly. "Got any water?" he asked, his voice still low. Alara shook her head. Their small bag, containing their few meager possessions, hadn't included water. Silas reached into the canvas bag he'd stowed and pulled out a metal canteen. He offered it to Alara without a word. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took it, unscrewing the cap. The water was cool and clean. She held it to Clara's lips, the baby drinking greedily, the whimpers subsiding. Lily, who had been watching silently, looked up at Silas. He didn't meet her gaze, but after a moment, he nudged the canteen towards Alara again. "For her," he said, indicating Lily. Alara helped Lily take a small sip. It was a simple gesture, practical, necessary. But it was the first thing he had done that felt. Not like owning, but like providing. It didn't erase the fear, but it softened its edges just slightly. She handed the canteen back. "Thank you," she murmured. He took it back, capped it, and put it away. "Got a place," he said after a long silence, his gaze still ahead. "Small. Not much." Alara waited. He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. She understood. It was a ranch or a cabin, somewhere out in this vast emptiness. His home. Now theirs. The uncertainty remained, a knot in her stomach, but for the moment, the thirst was quenched, and the fear of separation had been averted. She focused on keeping Lily warm and Clara settled, finding a fragile comfort in the rhythm of the wagon and the quiet strength of the man beside her. A man she didn't know, couldn't fathom, but who, for reasons she couldn't grasp, had bought their little family whole. The sun had set by the time they reached his place. It was as he described. Small, nestled in a shallow valley, A simple cabin built of rough-hewn logs, a corral, a small stable. Sparse, isolated, miles from anywhere. He stopped the wagon, setting the brake. The silence of the prairie descended, vast and absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through the tall grass. Silas got down stiffly. "Bring your things," he said, walking towards the cabin door. Alara gathered their bundle, helped Lily down, and shifted Clara on her back. She followed him, her boots crunching on the gravelly path. The cabin was dark inside, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke and dust. Silas struck a match, lighting a lantern that hung from a rafter. The soft glow illuminated a single room, sparsely furnished. A rough table, 2 chairs, a small cot, and a larger bed frame in one corner. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. "Cold tonight," he said, moving towards the hearth. He knelt, adding kindling and larger pieces of wood. A small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows. Alara stood near the door, Lily clinging to her skirt, Clara fussing again, tired and hungry. She felt awkward, unsure where they were meant to be, what they were meant to do. She had been bought, but she had never been taught how to be bought. "Food," Silas said, without looking up from the fire. "In the box," he gestured towards a wooden crate near the table. Alara hesitantly approached the crate. Inside were simple provisions, sacks of flour and beans, some smoked meat, potatoes, a small tin of lard. She found a pot and the makings for a simple stew. Her hands, though trembling slightly, moved with practiced efficiency. Cooking was something she knew, something useful. While she worked, stirring the stew over the fire Silas had built, she watched him from the corner of her eye. He moved about the cabin quietly, lighting another lantern, checking the small window, seeming to settle the space. He didn't ask her name or Lily's or Clara's. He didn't ask about their past, where they'd come from, or what they'd endured. The lack of questions was unnerving, yet also, strangely, a relief. There were no demands for explanations, no prying eyes on her grief. He brought water from a bucket outside, filled a basin, and set it near the fire. He didn't tell them to wash, but the implication was clear. Alara washed Clara first, gently cleaning her face and hands, then helped Lily. She splashed some water on her own face, the cool water a shock to her weary skin. They ate the stew in silence, sitting at the rough table. It was simple but hot and filling. Lily, initially shy, ate with surprising gusto. Clara, after being fed some softened stew, drifted to sleep in Alara's lap. Silas ate steadily, his gaze often directed towards the fire. After they finished, Silas cleared the dishes, washing them in the basin. Alara watched him, still unsure of the boundaries. Should she be doing that? He didn't seem to expect it. He simply did it. Then he looked at the bed frame. "Mattress needs straw," he stated, a practical observation. "Can fill it tomorrow," he nodded towards the cot. "Small one can sleep there." Alara understood. Lily could have the cot. Where would she and Clara sleep? Silas pointed to the bed frame. "You and the baby," he hesitated, then added, "I'll take the floor." Alara's eyes widened slightly. He was giving them the beds, giving them the most comfortable sleeping spaces. It was unexpected. It contradicted the image she'd held of the man who had bought them, the man who owned them. He was offering comfort, sacrificing his own. It was another small, quiet gesture, building a confusing picture of this stranger. She settled Lily on the cot, tucking a worn blanket around her. Lily was asleep almost instantly. Then she carefully laid Clara on the existing mattress on the bed frame, the baby heavy and warm against her side. Alara lay down beside her, the unfamiliar feel of the rough fabric beneath her, the sound of Silas settling down near the fire, a rustle of blankets, a sigh. She lay awake for a long time, listening to his quiet breathing, the crackle of the dying fire, the vast silence outside. She didn't understand this man. She was still afraid of the uncertainty he represented, but the sharp edge of her fear was dulled by the small acts of provision and unexpected kindness. They were together, they were warm, and they had food in their bellies. It was more than she had dared hope for earlier that day. Days turned into a week, then two. Life with Silas settled into a quiet, rigorous rhythm. He worked from dawn till dusk, tending to a small herd of cattle, mending fences, chopping wood. He didn't demand work from Alara, but she found herself doing it anyway. It felt necessary, a way to earn their keep, to prove they weren't a burden. She cleaned the cabin, washed their clothes in a nearby creek, helped tend a small, struggling garden patch. She did it silently, watching Silas, learning his habits. He still spoke little. His communication was through action. A side of cured meat left on the table, a pail of fresh water by the door, a broken hinge on the wagon fixed without a word. He was observant. If Lily shivered, a warmer blanket appeared that evening. If Clara was restless, he would quietly whittle a simple wooden bird for her to hold. These were not grand gestures, but steady, reliable ones. They chipped away at Alara's fear and suspicion, replacing them with a tentative curiosity, a fragile sense of safety she hadn't felt since her parents died. Her internal monologue was a constant hum of observation and calculation. What was he thinking? Why had he bought them? What did he expect? He never answered these questions, not in words. His actions were the only explanation he offered. He was providing, protecting, asking for nothing in return, except, perhaps, for them to simply exist within the perimeter of his quiet life. One evening, as Alara was cleaning up after their meager supper, a rider approached the cabin. It was a man from town, one of the faces from the auction. He was loud, jovial, but his eyes held a sharp, assessing glint. He spoke to Silas outside, their voices low at first. Then the visitor's voice rose, boisterous and demanding. Alara froze, her hand on a tin plate. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was aggressive. She felt a prickle of unease, the old fear resurfacing. What did he want? Was he here about them? Lily, playing quietly near the fire, looked up, sensing the tension. Clara slept soundly in the corner. Silas's voice remained low, but it had a hard edge Alara hadn't heard before. Then silence. A heavy silence that stretched, taut and unnerving. Alara crept to the small window, peering through the dusty pane. Silas stood facing the visitor, his stance wide, his arms loosely at his sides, but his body language was a clear warning. The visitor was backing away, his face set in a scowl. "Listen, Silas," the man said, his voice now tight with anger. "Folks in town are talkin'. 3 girls, a baby. That ain't right. You ain't fit for 'em. Maybe we should just take 'em off your hands."
Pushing somewhere proper.
Alara's blood ran cold. Take them? Separate them? She gripped the windowsill, her knuckles white. Silas didn't move. "They're mine," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I bought 'em fair and square. Buying ain't having the right to keep 'em from folks who can do better." The visitor sneered. He took a step forward, emboldened. "Maybe I should just step in and—" In a movement so fast Alara almost missed it, Silas's hand went to the worn holster at his hip. He didn't draw the gun, not fully, but his hand rested there, his fingers curled around the butt. It was a silent, lethal promise. The visitor stopped dead. He looked at Silas, at the hand on the gun, at the implacable look on the cowboy's face. The jovial facade was gone, replaced by fear and grudging respect. All right, the man mumbled, holding up his hands defensively. "Just passin' through." No harm meant, he backed away further, awkwardly. "See you around, Silas." Silas didn't reply. He just watched as the man turned and practically ran back to his horse, mounting quickly and riding away, disappearing into the twilight. Alara let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs felt like jelly. She turned from the window, her eyes meeting Silas's as he re-entered the cabin. His gray eyes were hard, the softness she had begun to perceive in him completely absent. He looked dangerous, protective. He didn't say anything about the encounter. He walked past her, went to the fireplace and stirred the embers. But his presence in the small cabin felt different now. It wasn't just quiet competence. It was fierce protection. He had defended them, claimed them not just as property, but as his to keep safe. The fear was still there, the lingering unease of being owned, but it was overlaid with a new, complex emotion: gratitude. He had stood between them and the threat of being scattered to the wind. The incident solidified something between Alara and Silas, an unspoken understanding. He protected, she endured, and made their life function within the cabin's walls. The world outside was harsh and judgmental, but inside, there was a fragile bubble of safety he had created. Alara began to work not just to earn her keep, but to contribute, to strengthen the fragile unit they had become. She learned to track small game, to identify edible plants, to mend clothes with careful stitches. She grew stronger, more capable, her vulnerability slowly hardening into resilience. She no longer thought of Silas as merely the man who had bought them. He was Silas, the man who was quiet, who watched, who provided, who protected. The man who had given them a place when they had none. The complex, contradictory figure who was both owner and guardian. The slow build of trust was cementing into something deeper, something resembling loyalty. The future was still uncertain, still held the vast emptiness of the prairie, but facing it with Silas, with her sisters beside her, felt less like walking into a storm and more like finding shelter. One blustery spring afternoon, a different kind of challenge arose. Clara, who had been coughing for days, developed a fever. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. Alara knew the sickness. She had seen it before. It had taken her parents. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She looked at the small, struggling baby, then at Silas, who had come inside, alerted by Alara's frantic whispers and Clara's labored gasps. Silas knelt beside the cot where Clara lay. He placed a large, calloused hand gently on her forehead. His expression, usually unreadable, softened with concern. He looked at Alara. "Sickness," he stated, his voice low. Alara nodded, tears welling in her eyes despite her efforts to remain strong. "Yes, the coughing sickness." Ma and Pa, she couldn't finish the sentence. Silas looked at the baby, then at Alara, his gray eyes serious. Long ride to town. Too long for the child. Maybe he stood up, walking to a rough cupboard. He rummaged inside, pulling out a small, leather-bound book and a few dried herbs in cloth bags. "My mother knew some things," he murmured, more to himself than to Alara. He opened the book, its pages brittle with age, examining faded drawings and spidery script. Alara watched him, a flicker of something she couldn't name blooming in her chest. He wasn't dismissing her fear. He was acting, trying to help. He carefully selected some herbs, crushed them, and mixed them with hot water. The cabin filled with a sharp, medicinal scent. He brought the mixture to Clara, using a spoon to coax a few drops into her mouth. Through the night, Alara and Silas stayed by Clara's side. Alara held the baby, murmuring soft words, wiping her feverish brow. Silas sat nearby, adding wood to the fire, occasionally administering the herbal mixture, his gaze fixed on the tiny, struggling form. He didn't offer false reassurances, but his quiet, unwavering presence was a comfort stronger than any words. He was sharing the burden, the fear, the watch. As the hours passed, a silent partnership formed between them. Alara knew how to comfort and care for her sisters. Silas brought practical knowledge and a quiet strength. He showed Alara how to make a poultice from other herbs, how to position Clara to ease her breathing. Alara followed his instructions, her hands steady despite her exhaustion and fear. The storm outside had intensified, wind howling around the cabin, rain lashing against the windows, a reflection of the battle being fought within. Towards dawn, Clara's breathing deepened, becoming more regular. Her fever seemed to break slightly. Alara felt a wave of pure, overwhelming relief wash over her. She looked at Silas, who was watching the baby intently. He met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a shared moment of exhausted hope. In that moment, something fundamental shifted. The barriers between owner and bought, stranger and child, seemed to dissolve. They were simply two people who had faced down a threat together, fighting side by side for the life of a child they both cared for. Elara saw the exhaustion etched on Silas's face, the genuine concern in his eyes, and the last vestiges of her fear of him evaporated. He wasn't a master, he was a partner, a protector. Days later, Clara was recovering, weak but smiling. The cabin felt lighter. Elara stood outside, watching Silas mend a fence line in the distance. Lily was chasing butterflies nearby. Clara was asleep inside. Alara's hands, once calloused by fear and necessity, were now capable, confident. She knew how to survive here, how to contribute. She knew her place wasn't defined by being bought, but by the strength she found within herself and the connection she had forged, painstakingly, with this quiet man. He wasn't conventionally kind or outwardly affectionate, but his kindness was in the deed, his affection in the unwavering provision and fierce protection. He had given them not just shelter, but a sense of belonging they had lost. They were his, yes, but in a way that felt less like ownership and more like being claimed by family. As the sun warmed her face, Elara felt a sense of quiet dignity settle over her. She was no longer the frightened, vulnerable girl from the auction block. Hardship had not broken her. It had forged her into something stronger. She looked at the vast, challenging landscape, at the solitary figure of Silas working, at her sister playing, and felt a resilient hope bloom in her chest. This was their life now, built on necessity, tested by fear, and cemented by quiet acts of courage and unexpected connection. It was not the life she would have chosen, but it was their life, and they would face it, together. The future was uncertain, as always, but now, for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel entirely without promise.